Hey folks, welcome to Free Speech Friday. As we speak, two people to my right are both trying to break the Twitter blockade.
Yes.
Sarah Carter, fantastic investigative journalist, one of the top voices and minds on the right, and David Reboy, my partner in crime in so many ways, dropped a good piece today at the Federalist talking about how Twitter is talking a good game. CEO Jack Dorsey came out this week and actually claimed to be changing their ways. He admitted, all right, which was refreshing, that they have a left-wing bias, and he said he's fixing it. But didn't you and our guy Nick Short have a meeting with them this week?
So we've had several meetings with them over the course of the last couple of weeks, and they reached out. They wanted to speak to conservative Twitter users who are, maybe power users, and maybe you can say that we use it every day.
Power.
Nick, for sure.
We
Power
use it
user.
every
Nick
day.
Political Short is the
Right.
man.
Absolutely. And so we were going back and forth with these people, and we really wanted to challenge them and say, hey, there are things that we have noticed over the course of the last year that that are kind of weird. And they're
And
kind
by
of
weird, it means bad for conservatives.
yeah,
Very bad.
bad for conservatives. So there are a few things that they couldn't really disagree with, and we told them, for example, last year we all had, let's say, half the number of followers, and we had 2 or 3 times the number of impressions, the number of times a tweet was viewed. Now that doesn't make sense mathematically. It just doesn't. Something else has to be happening. So their answer to this stuff was,
So explain that to me, like if I'm just, because I'm not very savvy on all of the
Right.
computer technology. I just notice things happening. But if I'm looking at my Twitter, how does that happen?
Well, basically, between Nick, David, and I, all of our accounts more than doubled in the number of people following us.
Okay, yes.
And yet
Me
the
too.
overall number of impressions, number of times a human being saw one of our tweets, dropped. I mean, that's just absurd. There's no way that makes any sense unless Twitter is putting their finger on the scale. And that's where people talk about shadow banning and all this. And they wanted to argue about what's a shadow ban and do they do viewpoint discrimination, right? Are they discriminating against conservatives, or does it just happen that your account's dropped off? Who knows? What did they say?
right. So they said, hey, maybe your tweets aren't that engaging anymore. Like, oh, okay. They're no less engaging than they were last year.
Right.
So
But
you didn't change anything about yourself, right?
yeah, no,
You're still David
exactly.
Reboy.
Yeah, no. I mean, and we're still tweeting. All of us are still tweeting with the same kind of frequency and the same kind of stuff, and the content is good. And they were like, hey, we'd like to offer you a, if you want to take a course by Twitter on how to tweet better. Like,
Oh,
But the guy they sent to go
Okay.
teach Nick, David, and I how to tweet has what, a couple hundred followers versus
100.
Nick's 150,000 followers?
Yeah.
Sarah, you got what, 250,000, 500,000,
but
ridiculous amount?
yeah, well, I think right now around 426,000
Yeah.
followers. So.
But we need
Right.
lessons from Twitter's expert
Yeah,
there
yeah,
on
yeah.
how to tweet. No, the idea is, and here's
And
the
he only
problem.
had a couple hundred.
He had a couple hundred.
He had
and was
100.
Okay,
literally
that's
bragging about it.
embarrassing. That's embarrassing. Why would Twitter? What, you didn't take that offer, did you?
look, no. I mean, I was kind of curious about it, but at the end of the day, we went back several times, and they refused. What I thought was really offensive was they refused to acknowledge that any of this stuff was happening, and they spoke around in circles. And I think, look, frankly, I mean, that's their job. That's the job. Twitter brought in some folks to talk to conservatives who, I don't think they're bad people, but their job was to make you leave there knowing less than you did when you walked in.
To be
So
annoyed
you
enough
felt
to stop.
completely confused as you
Yeah.
walked out, like what?
Well, no, actually not. That's the problem. David and Nick knew more than either of these Twitter employees, whose job was just to obfuscate the fact. And here's the way it actually works. Twitter's got what they call a quality filter. All right, their quality filter is supposed to stop spam and bots and abusive behavior from bothering people. But in the course of implementing this, they used a bunch of metrics that allow the left, who is very organized, to do what's called a heckler's veto. So they get a mob together and they say, Jim Hansen put out a tweet today that's offensive. Report his tweet, report his account, and then block him. And they implement all those things, which count as black marks against your account. And so eventually you fall below a line, and then Twitter starts dropping your tweets out of sight. right? And that's what happened. So when
okay.
enough of the mob attacks your account, and they built a tool.
Who is the mob?
The mob is the organized left.
The mob is the
All
organized
right,
left.
it's the resistance movement. It's all the folks who
Share
do all of this
Blue,
stuff. Share
it's
Blue,
all
the
this-
giant
yeah.
liberal organizations.
David Brock, yeah.
And they built these
his names,
lists.
yeah.
They built lists of hundreds of thousands of conservative accounts. And what they do is they can block them in one mass movement. So Twitter built a tool that allows people to take hundreds of thousands of conservative accounts that they don't even know these people, but someone has decided they're evil. They press one button, and then they're blocked for all these Twitter users, and Twitter counts that against you, right? So they built a system that doesn't discriminate on viewpoint, but it lets the left create trouble for conservative accounts, and then those conservative accounts aren't seen.
Right.
Wow, I feel like I'm learning so much right now. Like I honestly did not realize that was happening.
Right. So let's say, it kind of makes sense from Twitter's point of view to want to penalize users who are exhibiting, let's say, troll-like behavior. Who are always going and they're always and they're being banned by a lot of people, like hey, buzz off, etc. So when it happens organically, it kind of makes sense to penalize those people. But the way these people use Block Together, it's like you don't even know who is blocking you, but for example, if you're on, some of us are on 20 different block lists, and 20 different block lists that are subscribed to by
Thousands.
1,000, 100,000 different leftists. That's 100,000 times that you have been blocked. So they look at
It
you
looks
and they
like you're a
think
much
it looks
bigger
like you're a
jerk than you
troll.
are.
Right.
You look like you're a troll,
You look
and
like
then
you're a
they
troll. And then they can go, oh, okay, well, let's limit these people's accounts. Now it gets even worse. So let's say you're not on, Sarah Carter happens to not be on a block list. Somehow. I don't know. It's unlikely, but somehow.
I'm pretty sure now I'm going to be looking for
Right.
what lists I've been blocked from.
But this is great. But you interact with us on Twitter. We are on block lists, so you're sucked in.
It's guilt by association.
Oh, great. Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. No
I know,
wonder. I'm
yeah.
like,
So thanks for sitting on the couch, because that's
Right.
going to cost you.
Yeah,
now,
this is gonna
now
cost you.
surely I will
Totally.
be blocked.
All right, but I want to get your opinion on something, because President Trump has started weighing in now. All right, and he actually tweeted a thread last week saying social media censorship is wrong. And then he put it in one of his campaign speeches where he said, okay, I have to put up with fake news. I'm not trying to stop fake news. I want them to change. He said, so I don't want to ban fake news. I want them to fix their ways, and it's the same with social media. You shouldn't censor it. But at some level, if they're not going to fix it, and we tried, what's going to happen next? Should the government get involved?
I don't think I know. Look, I'm somebody who absolutely believes that the government should stay out of things, but I think if Twitter wants, Twitter can lose so many of us. What if we decide to create our own platform, a different platform, and everybody just pulls out of Twitter? Think about all the money. I think money talks, right? And Twitter needs followers. They need people to be actively participating in this. And I'm sure Twitter doesn't want to end up being what I'll consider just a leftist or liberal account. Or
A walled garden of angry leftists.
yeah, a walled garden. It would make no sense for them, and honestly, it would hurt them, frankly. So Twitter,
Not a good business model.
So I think what the right should do is threaten that. Okay, if you're going to do this to us, if you're going to allow the left to do that, well, we'll just walk away from Twitter and we'll find our own platform or create a new platform where everybody has the right to freely speak, like we thought. I don't know. Is that an option, or am I just dreaming?
So, I don't know. Personally, I think you're dreaming.
David, you're knocking me down.
I
Boom, boom,
think
boom,
I'm
boom,
so
boom.
Remember,
sorry.
David's a pessimist on
Yeah,
everything, so
David's
keep that in
me.
mind.
Yeah. So I think you're dreaming because, unfortunately, you can make a good case that these aren't. We're in a different time. The political conversation now doesn't take place in town halls in small towns.
That's right. It takes place
It
on
takes
social
place
media.
on social media.
I know.
And it is a, we had a court ruling that Donald Trump can't block people because his Twitter account is a public space. And following from that logic, I don't know. I think it's a recognition of where we are, sort of where we are in the debate, where we are in American society, where this this is the public square, you know, and
And the best ideas should win.
the best ideas should win.
Well, absolutely, but they shouldn't have the, and I guess now that they're being outed makes it different, right? So we know now what's going on, so that makes it different. And if Twitter's willing to comply as a company to allow that public space to be free, then great. I love Twitter. Let's use it.
Right.
Right?
Yes. So
But-
what I would like is something like a social media bill of rights that would make it possible for or that would
Mandatory?
make it mandatory for these people to not discriminate by viewpoint. Now you can start it after social media networks larger than 1 million users, because then you can have your own small little network and not have to deal with this. But if you're operating, or even you can make it even 20, 30, 50 million users, you should not be able to discriminate this way, because frankly, I mean, it's bad for our society, it's bad for our democracy, and if
Okay, but
It's- well,
let's walk through what happens.
Bill of Rights.
All right, let's say
Yeah.
because that requires a law. So then you've got legislation. All right, you've got the government doing it. Now I'm kind of with Sarah. I don't want the government to do it. I want Twitter and Facebook and the other things to fix this themselves, because I don't believe things ever get better when the government gets involved.
Yeah,
But
that's what
there's a concept of a public commodity, like electricity. Like things that are necessary to exist as a public organization of any kind. If Twitter and Facebook fall into that, then maybe there should be a voluntary thing with oversight that lays out those things, that says you can't viewpoint discriminate. You have to make sure that your mechanisms aren't unintentionally causing viewpoint discrimination, which is currently happening.
Right.
And then if you don't, then the government can come in and investigate and potentially do something. So I guess there may be some hybrid. I don't want the government stating, because what happens when President Kamala Harris comes in, right? And then all of a sudden it's her FCC,
Oh, no.
right? And she's the one deciding what is and isn't the correct interpretation is. I don't want that power in the hands of a Democrat. But I want right now President Trump to scare the crap out of him and threaten it. I want the FCC to look at him and talk about, are they being fair? I want the Federal Elections Commission looking at him and saying, if Twitter is throttling conservative politicians' accounts and not doing the same to Democrats, isn't that an in-kind contribution? Right? You're helping a Democrat, you're
That's right.
disadvantaging a
That's
Republican, that's contributing to their campaign. So let's look at them and say, okay, now, and as you said, let's talk to their advertisers and say, do you want to advertise on a platform that discriminates against half the country? No. Let's push them that way,
Well,
and
let's
hopefully
do
they'll
what
do
the
it.
left has done for a long time, right? I mean, every time you see shows, it's groups like Media Matters, David Brock, all these folks come out and then they threaten. They use their machine to threaten a medium, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose, but they always rattle everybody's cage, right? And that's what they do. I think, to be fair, we don't want to be like that. I mean, I want to hear everybody's viewpoint. I'm okay with people coming on my Twitter account and saying, look, I totally disagree with you. This is how I feel about Trump. I want to hear that. Or this is how I feel about the investigation. But I don't want people limiting my ability to get my stories or my points of view out there, or yours, or anyone's for that matter.
And we want the left to be out there and the right to be out there and let the ideas battle.
That's
I
right.
don't
It's
want a
good.
private conservative platform any more than I want a private liberal platform, because I want to engage the smartest people on the left, take their ideas on in a substantive way, and win the argument. And you can't do that if only one team's there.
Look, sometimes it just makes sense, right? Because we would think it's a left, it's a right thing. The other day I was talking to someone, I won't say their name because they're not here, but they are very liberal. They were a big Bernie supporter, and they came up and they thanked me at
Talking to my daughter?
Fox. They came up and they said, thank you so much for getting the stories out on this investigation on the side of, the FISA court and Bruce Orr and all the things that we've been discussing over and over again, the Hillary Clinton campaign. And I said, wow, I'm surprised that, that interests you, or that's something that you would be interested in. And they said, no, absolutely, because we were cheated. We were cheated out of an election because of Hillary Clinton. And you know what? Even though you and I may disagree, we agree that the abuse needs to stop in the government. That's where we can find common ground. And that it hit me. like, we're fighting each other. The country's so divisive. We see it on social media. That's what we're talking about right now. But there are moments, there are points where we can actually agree on something, but we're not being allowed to find that out because this has been played on us, played on the country, actually. We have been so ripped apart. I always tell people, you know what? You want to talk about the Russians? Don't even worry about the Russians. We're doing it to ourselves.
Right.
The Russians are just sitting back enjoying this.
But that's the fun thing about it. And this, a lot of this grew out of the fact that the Russians were doing. The Russians were dividing us on both sides.
That's right.
The Russians were playing anti-Hillary and anti-Trump, and they still are. That's their game. They want to do things that slow America down, that make us less able to function against them.
That's right.
Which
Less
is divide us
effective.
internally.
Less effective. Hold our administration hostage. Hold our people hostage. Have us battling each other instead of looking at what's actually happening all around the globe. While they're doing their own thing, we're all fighting each other, and they're pretty much moving into South Asia, going into Iran, going into Iraq, doing what they need to do in Syria, and we're just kind of like hating each other, you know?
Yeah.
It's like a perfect operation.
Yeah, look, it's it's perfect. On the other hand, though, we have things that really do divide us. You know, we
True.
have two very distinct visions of you know, of the good, of what's, you know, what's virtuous and what we want from this country, the way we want the country to run, and everything. I mean, you know, there's the red state model and the blue state model are completely different. You know, from Whole
Almost
Foods.
irreconcilable.
Yeah. I mean, I think actually irreconcilable, you know, so you have that perfect storm together with, you know, together with some of these things that are going on. Yeah, I mean, it's horrible.
It is.
It's horrible. We do nastier info ops on one another in this country than anything the Russians or the Chinese or anyone could ever hope to do. We do worse to each other.
And that's what I've been saying from the beginning. I mean, it's so crazy because you hear, you know, both on the left and the right, you hear people screaming bloody murder over what the Russians did, and did they get some stories out on Facebook and how much they invested, which was, I think, only a few million, right? It wasn't even
I don't even think
that
it was a
much
few
in
million.
this
I
don't even
operation.
think it was less, a couple $100,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe a couple $100,000, and, you know, putting some stories out there, and somehow that was supposed to have affected our entire election, or, you know, and no matter how many times people say, no, it didn't, it's still, that's the, you know, message that's coming across on social media and trying to scare people. But we ourselves are eating each other alive. And instead of taking a step back, look, I'm not a Bernie person, that's pretty obvious, but I take a moment to listen to somebody else's point of view and say, okay, look, I'm so grateful I live in a nation where people can have these opposing viewpoints and have all these amazing thoughts, and, you know, not be afraid that they're going to be hauled off to some prison and gulag, and be murdered for speaking out against President Trump. I'm like, great, look, go ahead and speak out against whoever you want. I mean, this is America.
Right.
But what really frightens me is, back to the social media platforms, is that it's being utilized as a weapon. We're utilizing it against each other. And not only is that dangerous on a global scale of how, you know, you can utilize these, or it could be actually quite effective if you're targeting other nations, you're trying to get ideas out there, free thought. But if we're censoring each other, how could we ever use this?
Well, and President Trump did a really good job of laying it out. He says people need to figure out for themselves what's fake. Okay? You can't decide that for them. And that's what the big social media platforms are trying to do. They're trying to become the deciders. We will tell you what's true and what's fake, what you should trust and what you shouldn't. And I'm sorry, I don't want Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey deciding what I can look at and what other people can look at. Especially since they've already decided, and you want to talk, they put us in Twitmo, right? We're shadow banned.
I like that.
Right? Oh, I didn't make it up, but yeah. But I mean,
So great.
that's where we are right now, is that they have become the ones who are the keepers of the public truth.
Yeah.
And that can't be done given that they've already admitted their own biases. So, Jack, come on, man. Play straight. You said you're gonna. We want you to set Twitter free. Zuckerberg, you can do the same thing. All right.
Set Twitter free.
Set Twitter free. I mean, it's a little birdie. Shouldn't it fly? Right?
Won't you fly